So today for this video we are going to see some things, a little bit theoretical part of it, like how the data is stored in Unqork. So as of now we have seen a lot of things, right? We have seen text field, we have seen drop downs, checkboxes, a lot of things we have seen. But how that data is stored, right? So usually in the traditional coding, what happens if we deal with uh, front end frameworks such as React or Angular, the screen is just used to build that UI, right? And to store the data, we need to have a backend, right? We need to connect to the database so that data gets stored into the database once we do some submit or whatever the actions we do. So right. So for that we require the different endpoints. We need the APIs so that we just pass that data to that database and the data is stored into the database. So that happens in the traditional coding. But in Unqork, we don't need to bother about those, right? In Unqork, we have a default database which is already configured by Unqork, right? So that data gets stored inside this in that database. So that database which is used, that is called as MongoDB. So it is not a relational database. It is not a SQL database, but it's a MongoDB database. So how that data gets stored, so we'll see that thing. So once we have a theoretical knowledge about it, how the data gets stored into the backend, which is a default database which is provided by MongoDB, which is provided by Unqork, which is MongoDB of course. So then we will be able to get to know the APIs that we are going to use in Unqork, and how to get that data once that data is stored, and how to delete that data. So whatever the CRUD operations, right, are there that we can do using the plugin component. But before that, we are going to see that. So let's go ahead with that. So let me drag and drop this text field for our use case. Let's again write the property ID as first name and label as first name as well. So let me copy paste this. Let me put it here, last name as the second property, right? And maybe let me take drop down. So here we'll ask for gender, right? So this is a form that we are building. Oops, we haven't filled any values. So let's fill it here, male, female. Okay, so this is a drop down values we have given, and let's put a button over here to have the, so this button, the use of this button would be to save this data into the MongoDB database, which is like default attached to the Unqork. So let's put it as submit. Let's keep it at submit and just put the property ID as button submit. Okay. And here if you see, we have this thing, right, which is save draft, event, validate, and reset. So we had seen event, right? We use event to trigger any component. So we saw that initializer we can trigger, or different rules, or whatever the other components that we want to trigger with the click of button, we can do that. But apart from that, we have this thing also, right? Save and save draft. So let's see, use this, because Unqork have this default feature where if we put this action type as save, and if we click a button in that preview mode, then whatever the data that we are going to put here, that is going to be saved into the database. So let's see. Okay, let me preview this page or this module. So let's put here names. Okay, I have put this name and maybe mail. Okay, so let's click on the submit button. So ideally what should have happened? Unqork will trigger a backend API, okay, which will be used to store these things into a Unqork database. So if I click on this button, okay, before that, one thing to notice is this is the Unqork, or this is a preview URL of this module. We have already seen this. This is a normal URL, which is a just the module ID, and this is a preview URL. So this is called as a new submission, as I have already told you, right, in the previous videos. So just observe this, like if I click on submit button, you will see the change in the URL. So here you will see success, and here what you will see is few IDs are mentioned here, right? So here is this ID, and one more ID is added after the module. So let's try to see this, right? What is that? What is this extra two IDs which have came up on that screen, right, on the URL? So let me just copy paste this into some editor so we can freeze, or we can like try to debug this, right? So I will just press enter here just to separate these IDs. So up till this, now what was this? This was a normal display of module, right, of Unqork module, I would say. And this ID, right, which is after this, this is the submission ID. Okay, and again this is, if you observe this, this ID and this ID is similar, right? So this is a schema. So what are these, right? Here we have this normal preview URL, this submission ID, and the schema. So what is this? Let me explain you that. So before that, let me, or maybe let me open a new tab here. So I will explain you. So what is, first thing is, what is schema, right? So what is schema is, so if we try to compare these things, I mean database thing, with the traditional coding languages, what we have a table, right? Usually if we want to store any data into a database, in the SQL database, we store that in a table. So in a table, what we have ID, right? Then we have name, or just to compare our data, if we are storing into the uh, SQL database, this is how it will look, right? At a database level, this tables would be there, and all this data would be stored in this manner, right? So if we, so some ID would be generated, or maybe we need to explicitly pass the ID, unique identifier, for this particular row. Let me just put it one, and here whatever the name we will give, right? So I'm not writing everything, but just to explain you this, and here it will be a third column. So in this way the data would be stored, right, in the SQL database. So the second row, so second entry will come here, and it will be stored. So this is a SQL database pattern, right? But in the MongoDB, okay, which is no SQL database, how it happens is no such table is created, right? So maybe I can name this table as user table, right? And inside this user table, all these things are stored. So if you want to get that things, we will have a query where like select star from table name, whatever you have seen already, right? You might have seen this in your college days. That in that way we query that results, whatever, or query that records, whatever we want, and get that records. But in the MongoDB, what happens is, instead of calling this as a table, we call it as schema. So it will be a user schema. Okay, I have just made a typo here. User schema, right? So this is something you can compare it with the table. So this is the user schema where we are going to store all those data in that, right? So how then MongoDB it will be stored is, it will be stored in the object. So the first object would be created where the first thing would be ID. So maybe I'm just writing ID here, some random ID, and here it would be first name, it would be Virat, and last name, and the gender. So this is how the records would be stored. So if second entry is made, then one more object would be created, and that object would be having again that same keys. Okay, of course the different name. I'm just writing this thing for a different record. Okay, so in this way this records would be stored, right? So in case of a SQL database, we will mention that maybe select the record which is having ID from this table, then we will get this record, right? But in this case it would be having a different queries to pass to get all those records whatever we want. So this is called as a schema. In Unqork or in MongoDB, we store the things in a schema, and inside the schema all those records are present. So when we talk about this URL, what is the schema? So this is a user schema, or not a user schema, but this is a ID of a schema where all these records would be stored. So we are not going to call it as a user schema in our case, right? It would be uniquely identified by this ID. Let me copy paste this here. So whatever the user schema that would be created by Unqork, that would be user schema, and this would be the unique schema ID. So this I can say as schema ID, right? Which is a unique identifier for this particular schema where all the records are stored. And this, okay, this record which we have stored just now by clicking on submit button. So this is called as submission ID. So we can say this ID is something called as submission ID. So this record is uniquely identified by this ID. So this is a primary key for this record. And for this other one also, if we do a submit again, if we go to the screen, if we put some random stuff here, okay, if I again click on submit button, if you see this middle key, right, which is a submission ID, it would be something different, right? If we say success, it would be different in this case. Okay, it is same as of now because we need to clear these records, right? Because currently we are viewing these things. So if I now go to the previous preview mode, if I enter here something and click on submit, so this record is now saved and it would be having a different submission ID, right? But if you observe this, this is again the same, right? Module ID and the schema ID are same. So which means again this data is stored in a schema which is having a schema ID as this. So this remains same, but it is having a different submission ID. So we can say this is the second record and it is having a different submission ID. And this first name, last name and gender would be something we have put over here. So in this way, this data would be stored. So in Unqork, what is schema is whatever module we create. Okay, so if we are trying to save the data, then by default, the data gets stored at a backend of this module. Okay, so once module is created, that module will create a schema, a blank schema where the records won't be there. But if we do this operation where we create these fields and use a button component, okay, and if we click on save, then these things would be saved into this schema, this module schema, and this is how the entries would be visible, just like here, right? These entries are getting visible. So in this way the data would be getting stored. And also if you see this, if you see this URL, now what it is doing is it is going to this schema. The first is what module we want to view. Okay, this part is that. So yes, we want to view this module, that's it. So this, the first piece of URL just renders the screen, the blank screen, and what submission we want to fetch. So this talks about this submission. Okay, and from which schema we want to get this submission, so that comes after this. So we can like split this URL into three pieces and each piece have a different significance of it, right, which I just explained you. So in this way data are stored in this. And now if we want to delete that data, right, just now we put all the data into the schema, but if we want to delete that data, for that the plugins would be used. where this plugin component is there, right? So plugin component is not only responsible for just deleting or all those things, but it would be having number of services, right? So just like this, if I want to delete anything, then Unqork will provide a default API service which is called as internal service here. So which is used to delete any particular submission. So that we need to select from here. So here if you see we have this delete, right? Let me put it as submission. So yeah, here we have delete multiple module submission, and also we would be having a delete service which is just having one record we can delete. So I'm just looking into that. Okay, I think they have removed that service which will delete only one record. I mean a separate service. Here only we can pass that particular record which we want to delete and it will work. So here we have all these operations, right? So all these operations, if you see, if you write here submission, so here you will see all these records are something to deal with submissions. So whatever the activities we want to do, if I want to update the record, then there would be a different service. If I want to add the record, then there would be a different service. For deleting, there would be a different service. Okay, but yeah, the question might be why we need a service to add these records in a submission, because this is something automatically taken care by Unqork, right? We don't need to set up some plugin to save this data. But the thing is, when we click on a save button, submit button, all these things get stored into a default module, right? Or a module we are previewing, right? So we are previewing this module, the sandbox module. So all the data gets stored into the into the schema of this module only. But if I want to store data into a different module schema, then I can use that service where I would be adding the records into a completely different schema instead of using a default module schema. So in Unqork practice, what usually we will do is the module we will create one use case of module is to create this layouts, right? That's it. We are not going to use modules to store data. Only we are going to use this module to have this UI look and feel. The other module we will use to just use it as a schema. So in that schema, we are just going to store all the records inside that. No other things we are going to do. And further, there are many use cases. We can create the API of a module as well. So that would be a third use case of module that we will see as we go ahead with the tutorials. But yeah, that was about this schema thing, the MongoDB database. So I have just explained you a MongoDB thing on a higher level, right? I haven't gone into the detail of MongoDB. But yeah, there are a lot of tutorials available on YouTube where you can just go through that. What is MongoDB? I mean, the one which I have told you, it is a database and this is how the data is stored. That's it. So this is enough for you to know what is MongoDB. It is a database and this is the way we can store a data. That's it. But apart from that, if you want to deep dive into it, feel free to browse those videos on YouTube and go through that. That would be beneficial for you to get a detailed understanding. But yeah, from Unqork perspective, this is about MongoDB and how the default database is already configured inside the Unqork. So yeah, I think that's it from this tutorial. So from the next tutorial, we will see the plugin components. We'll actually go to that schema where all these records are stored, and we will see whether actually these records are getting stored or not, how to delete that, how to update that. So we'll move on from there. But yeah, that's it from this tutorial. So hope you have liked this video. So if you have liked this video, please press the like button, and also don't forget to subscribe this channel. And also, if you are viewing this video for the first time, you can access the entire Unqork playlist which is already present on this channel, where you can learn Unqork from the start and again come here at this point. Thank you.